A couple of years back, an extensive survey of the 50 most delicious foods of the world was compiled. MASSAMAN curry came in #1 as the most delicious food ever anywhere. However, you can be sure that the judges making that evaluation were not tasting the stuff you get out of a jar. When I started looking at what other recipes were online for this masterpiece of Malaysian and Thai cooking, I was really quite shocked that almost everyone is using bottled, pre-made pastes. Why? It's a lot less work to make than French onion soup, for instance. So here's an excellent version of this delicious recipe from scratch. And although I have broken with tradition in 2 places, I explain those changes in the annotations if you read them, and you're free to ignore my modifications, of course. But I think you'll find that this is the best recipe you will ever get. It's rich, complex, and really addictive. Yeah. You want carrots to look good, you need to square them up. And you usually get carrots that are shaped like this. So, trim them like this. First make them into even squares. Of course you can cut them up from here, but what do we do with these? Well, we have something very useful that we can do with these kinds of scraps. We're going to dry them in the oven. The ends here, this is trash, but these kinds of scraps can be dried in the oven to make a carrot powder, and we're going to do that in just a moment. Okay, what I've done is I've set this up over a wire rack like you would use to cool off a cake or pie, over a baking tray, and I've got 100 grams of these large green chilies. These are spicy. These are not mild chilies, but they're not insanely hot. They're not like the little tiny Thai chilies, but they're hot. And I know that it's quite common to use dried red chilies for this curry. I'm going to use these chilies. This is what I like, and I've seen this actually done in Thailand. So I don't know where the idea among so many books and people that you always use red chilies for this. I don't know where it came from. I've seen green chilies used. I like green chilies. That's what I'm going to use. So I'm putting this in the oven at a fairly low temperature with the fan on overnight. It's gonna cook for about 8 hours in all. Now I've got, this is what the green chilies look like after they were dried overnight in the oven. I'm putting these in a little bowl of water, and I'm going to microwave these for about a minute. And these are those carrots that were dried out in the oven. These take a little longer to dry out than the chilies. These are also going to go in the spice grinder. Then after they come out, you got to pass them through a sieve. Kind of shake them through a sieve because there'll be little lumps that didn't dry out enough. Yeah. I want to show you the difference here of how the temperature matters. These are both dried carrots. These were dried out at about 95 degrees. These were dried out at about 60 degrees. These took overnight. These took 2.5 days. But these are much more red, and these actually taste better. If I was putting them on plating, using these as like a little powder on a plate for decoration, I would use this. But in this curry, I'm going to use this kind of powder. If you've watched my other videos, particularly regarding highly spiced foods, you've heard me say that different regions have different ways of dealing with spices, whether they're dry toasted, they're ground up first, they're toasted in oil. This is one of the more unusual cases, is that these are actually toasted or boiled in water first. I've got cinnamon, coriander, cilantro, star anise, and the green cardamom pods. These are all going to be cooked fairly slowly in water until they're dry. So we're going to first bring it to a boil, and then I'm going to turn the heat down and cook these very slowly until I've dried them back out again. They're simmering. I turned the heat down to 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. And let's see. Let's just see what the temperature actually is here. The infrared thermometer. Okay, we got about 80 degrees roughly at the surface. So that's good. You want You want it below the boiling point of water because you crank it up so much that the water it hits 100 degrees. The spices will also burn. So there'll be little parts of the pan will be even hotter than that, and that's where the spices will start burning. We don't want that. We just want to dry them out again. Drive off the water, dry out the spices. Another couple of minutes. These have been cooking now for about 4 minutes on low heat, and you can see there's still moisture there. They're not dry. You're going to keep this going until they're completely dry, but I'm going to turn the heat down now to 3 on a 1 to 10, and just keep an eye on them. Watch out that they don't burn. It's been about 6 minutes, and I'm turning the heat down even lower. Now I'm down to 2. And these are drying out. The pan surface temperature is now above the boiling point of water, and this is where you have to start really watching out. Turn the heat way down. You want to keep it going. In fact, I'm going to go 1.5 on 1 to 10. I've got a very low heat now. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes now. The pan temperature here is about 120 Celsius. I just checked it with the infrared thermometer. When it actually hits 10 minutes, I'm going to take these, put them in a bowl, let them cool off completely. And I've got those spices that we toasted in water and then dried out, and I'm putting these in the spice grinder. And we're going to grind this up. You'll notice that these spices didn't grind up quite the way they usually do. If you cook them in, you just dry roast them. So I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a teaspoon of coarse salt. The coarseness is for the abrasive properties, and I'm going to add about 1.5 teaspoons of turmeric, and I'm going to grind this some more. This is fun. Now this needs to be transferred to a container like a jar. So here's the jar that has the turmeric and the other ground spices in it. Now I'm going to put about a full teaspoon of this dried carrot, and maybe just a little bit more. It's okay. This adds a very interesting note to this. Yeah, it's not traditional in most recipe books you'll find, but this sort of thing is done, and they use a lot of other ingredients you can't get, so don't feel bad about using something that seems weird to you. Believe me, plenty of really weird ingredients go into MASSAMAN curries. This is just fine. This is still completely authentic. Okay, 1 pint of water, that's 500 milliliters. Teaspoon of salt. Tablespoon of that curry powder. And potatoes go in. I'm going to bring this to a boil over high heat, and then take it off the heat, put a lid on it, and let it stand there and steep. And when it's at a good rolling boil, put a cover on it, kill the heat, and move it to a back burner and let it just stand there with a lid on it. After those potatoes have completely cooled down to room temperature, then you strain them and set them aside. This is a great Thai restaurant trick, because potatoes take a long time to cook. You can't screw around with the sauce simmering with potatoes for 20 minutes. So you do a bunch of these up ahead of time. They're already flavored with the curry. They're soft. They're almost ready to eat right now. They're just got the ginger, garlic, lemongrass, and shallots. I'm going to cut these up very coarsely for the next step, very coarse. Now I've got a separate pan, a very heavy one with some non-stick surface properties, heating up, and the other pan, the one that we just toasted the spices in, I'm going to add some peanut oil. Okay, added the peanut oil. Here's the cashew nuts. They begin cooking these slowly while the other cooking in the other pan here. Now, this is getting hot. I've got it on the heat on 8 out of 1 to 10. There is no oil in the pan. This is on purpose. This is the way this is supposed to be made. I've got ginger, garlic, shallots, and lemongrass. Are all going to go into this pan as it's getting very hot. And I'm going to dry toast these dry toast them until you start to see some little black bits on them. You want to actually, not exactly burn them, but close to burn them. I'm going to show you the progress. The cashews are slowly starting to become more golden. And over here we have other ingredients that are becoming darker, but they're not ready yet. This has been about 4 minutes now. And you can see you get some really nice dark pieces here. Here and there, but it's not quite even yet, so I'm going to give this about 1 more minute. Don't stir it too much. If you stir it too much, it'll never have a chance to brown. You stir it maybe once every minute and a half, something like that. Don't start tossing it around in the pan constantly. You'll never get this burn type of marks. Not exactly burn, but you know what I'm talking about. Okay, meanwhile, the cashews, very close to being done. You can see the golden colors on them now. I'm going to turn the heat down on them just a little bit. Okay, it has been 5 minutes now, and I'm going to add an ounce of water and cover it and let them steam. Now I'm turning the heat way down from 8. I'm going all the way down to 2, and I'm just going to let them steam for a couple minutes. Okay, the cashews nicely golden, no burnt marks at all. Those are just going to sit in a bowl and rest until, with the little traces of peanut oil that are on them, they're going to sit there and rest until we're ready. Okay, it's been 2 minutes now for these. That's fine. I'm going to move these off the heat now and let them cool. Meanwhile, in yet another bowl, we have half an ounce of 15 grams of coriander or cilantro roots and stems that are soaking in a bowl of water to loosen all the dirt off of them. These are going to be used. Now, into the blender, I'm adding the shallots, the lemongrass, the garlic, and the ginger that we cooked over that high heat. I'm also adding these dried green chilies that were soaked. Okay, I'm going to add all of the water that the chilies were soaked in. Yeah, it's not traditional, I know. I don't understand why. It makes no sense to discard this water. It's got lots of flavor. And I'm going to add a little bit more water. We need enough water in here to turn this into a paste. And we'll have to stop and scrape it down a little bit. What we have here now, this heavy paste, can be stored in a jar in the refrigerator for a long time. At least a couple of weeks it'll be just fine. This is not very prone to being bacterially invaded. However, this is, of course, is not finished. In a restaurant we might store it at this stage if we don't make Thai curries or massaman curry very often, because we want to have maximum shelf life. We don't have to go through all this every time we need it. But in this case I'm making up the entire batch now, so this is a small amount. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this back on the blender and add the coconut milk. It's very perishable. You would not add the coconut milk if you plan to store this, because the coconut milk will make it go bad within maybe 3 days. Adding an entire can of 400 milliliters of coconut milk to this, and also some lime zest here in just a minute. Also going to be in. And you just take the zester, run it across the lime, and get about the zest of about half a lime off of this. And don't get the white pithy part either, just get the green part on the surface. That's where all the flavor is. The white part beneath it is very bitter. So it's about half of the lime. And of course it gets blended again. And now it has to be passed through a sieve, rubbed through as much as you can possibly get through this. Keep at it for a minute or two. Don't give up too soon. Okay, now we have our base. We're going to add about 2 tablespoons of that, maybe just a little bit more, of that prepared curry powder that we made up earlier. Also 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar. And a tablespoon of nam pho, Thai fish sauce to this. And we're going going to begin heating this gently on a medium-low flame. This is just barely at a simmer. I've actually got it on a heat of 1. And right now I'm keeping it around roughly 70 degrees Celsius. And I'm going to slowly... Okay, after about 5 minutes, I'm going to add a full tablespoon of dried basil to this. You can use Thai basil if you can get it. Where I'm at, nobody's ever heard of it. It does not exist. Then I'm going to add the raw chicken to this. This boneless, skinless chicken thighs I took apart myself. This is going to stay at a very low simmer for a few minutes, at least till the chicken absorbs some of this flavor before I start diluting it with everything. Okay, through the magic of video editing, about 5 minutes has gone by here, and we know that the chicken's got a lot of that flavor, and now I'm going to add the chicken stock, 120 milliliters. Why does it look like gelatin instead of the stuff you get in a can? Because this is good quality homemade chicken stock. I made it from the bones that this chicken came off of, the thigh bones. So now we're going to keep it got it on a heat of 2 on 1 to 10. It's going to stay at a very slow simmer for a while. We want this chicken to get nice and tender, and we want all the extra liquid to evaporate and really concentrate these flavors. I'm keeping this between 60 and 70 degrees the entire time. It's been about 50 minutes, just under an hour, about 52 minutes, something like that. This is darkened, as you can undoubtedly see in the video, because you didn't see all the in-between stages. Now I'm going to add an ounce of lime juice, 30 milliliters, and I'm going to add those potatoes that were previously boiled in the curry. And I'm going to let this cook a little bit more, reduce it down a little bit more. The potatoes will help thicken it, and we'll add the fresh chopped cilantro right at the end. Let's let this cook a little. Oops, almost forgot. Also add the cashew nuts. Yeah, those also go in at the same time the potatoes go in. Yeah, that's what happens when you're making something like this. Easy to forget an ingredient. Just look around, make sure you didn't forget something. It's the last 15 minutes here. I've increased the heat to where it's about 80 degrees, 85 degrees. You don't want to overcook this at this point. I'm adding about 1/4 of a cup that freshly minced cilantro. And also, this is not supposed to be a super thick, heavy curry. This is supposed to have some liquid to it. It's going to go over rice. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.